Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, September 10th, 2021. And we're going to get started here with our pre-market analysis on the S&P 500 futures market. So let's go ahead and jump to our ultra-high time frames as usual. Take a look at what has transpired over the last 24 hours. And our ultra-high time frames, all three, looking very strong with no signs of exhaustion. Of course, the current candle on these higher time frames, has time to develop, especially the monthly and the quarterly here. So can't say too much about that current candle. On the weekly, we still have that situation where there is a potential bullish divergence forming off of the low of the current weekly candle that will close this afternoon and just about, I think it's about 8 hours from now. So we'll see how this looks at the end of today, and could potentially close with a really nice bullish divergence. Just keep in mind that we do have the potential to push all the way down to the low of this candle that formed on August 20th, or the week that closed August 20th, and that would be a low of 43.47. So we're talking almost a 200-point drop, and we could still potentially have that bullish indication. So do want to keep that in mind. Let's jump down to our daily. And remember, yesterday we were talking about the potential of this bullish divergence off the current daily candle that still had 8 hours to develop and then close, and for this signal to potentially shift. And you can see where we drew it yesterday. It was right down here around 54.7 on the RVI there. It actually ended up closing right up here. So we're essentially flat on RVI there. Maybe there's an argument that it's a tick or two higher, but overall looks pretty much flat. So I think that there is somewhat of an argument there for a bullish divergence, an exotic divergence there, where you have essentially the same low on RVI, but you have a higher low on price. And so we do have that going on right there off that previous daily bar. And we'll just have to see what happens this morning. I do think that there's a much clearer bearish divergence off the highs than what we're seeing here, because when I look at the actual value of RVI for this candle, it's at 56.9. And then when I look at the value for this candle back here, it's 56.5. So it is technically just a slight bit higher. So I'm not in love with what this with this signal, but we will go ahead and kind of leave it there tentatively, because remember that this new candle and then the next candle after that, going into next week, this whole little picture that we're seeing right now could potentially change. But we'll just kind of keep it as it is right now and dial down to the 4 hour and see if we're getting any kind of agreement off that low. And we did talk about this yesterday. This was going into the open yesterday. We did have what I said could be argued is a bullish divergence off that previous daily low there. It was the overnight low when we did our pre-market yesterday. So we do have that there. Again, not a huge fan of that, but that is a valid divergence off the low. And then I'm noticing that, remember, we pushed up yesterday, I believe in the direction of what our bias was, and then we found some trouble up here at 45.29.50, and we did get some bearish divergences up there. So off of the previous daily high, we do have the counter signal in comparison to the bullish divergence we got off the low for that day. So we have a little bit of a situation where we are kind of chopping around, just like we were doing, up for 5 or 6 days up top here. We've now moved down into this next area in the market and getting a little choppy in here. Nonetheless, we do have a pretty good bearish divergence off the overnight high, or the previous daily high, and now off the overnight high. Assuming that this doesn't continue to follow through to the upside, we do have a bearish divergence off that current high that we made the overnight high. So we do have a lot of kind of discrepancies here. Nothing too pretty as far as a clear direction so far. As we dial down, maybe we'll start to build a bias for one side or the other, but things are definitely looking choppy in here. So going down to the 60-minute, did have a lot of decent bullish divergences on these lows as we pulled back. And just kind of looking at the previous daily high, do not necessarily have any type of sexy bearish divergence there. Everything kind of looks normal. We do have the bullish divergence off the previous daily low, and then the pullback down at the end of yesterday's market going into Globex. We got another little bullish divergence kind of formation down here as well. And now we do have the bearish divergence off the overnight high, or at least a few ticks below the overnight high there. So, kind of looking wishy-washy either way here. Because we don't have that bearish signal off that previous daily high, maybe not as much agreement, but we're going to have to dial down. We have the 30 and the 10 to see, and then we can kind of put it all together here and try to get something cohesive for this morning. The 30-minute agrees with all the bullish stuff we saw from the 4-hour and the 60-minute there. The previous daily high where we saw the bearish divergence on the 4-hour, I think that you could make a pretty decent bearish divergence argument there off that on the 30-minute. You can see that we had an RVI up here at 74, kind of sold off. Everything looked kind of normal there. We came all the way up, broke the previous high, made a significant higher high there, and the RVI made a significantly lower high. So definitely a decent argument there. So pretty much every time frame had that bearish signal, except for the hourly. Off the bottom end, we have an agreement with the hourly and the 4-hour on the lows. So as you can see, not quite as clear a picture as maybe some mornings are, and that's fine. That's just how it is. And a lot of mornings when we have a situation where we say that it's very kind of ambiguous, the market ends up being somewhat sideways that day. So let's take a look at the 10-minute here. Got the bullish divergence off the previous daily low. Got a very clear bearish divergence from the highs we made just before we finished our session yesterday. In fact, we did talk about this setup. So yesterday at the end of our trading session, we talked about the fact that we came up and actually got a 10-minute, 3-minute, 1-minute bearish signal from up here at 45.29 quarter. And the great part about it is we talked about 45.29 quarter being the level that could potentially hold and be a problem for the bulls on any type of push. So we called out 29 quarter. The market pushed to 29.50 yesterday. We got the 10-minute, 3-minute, 1-minute bearish signal, and then from there this sell-off. So a lot of this stuff we're calling before it ever even really actually follows through. Sometimes you don't get follow through, and that's perfectly fine. But when things do follow through, especially with a 10-minute signal, you do can end up having some pretty significant corrections. And this was 45.29. Eventually sold off by the end of the day to 44.87-ish. So we're looking at over 40-point sell-off. Not a bad thing going on there. Other than that, we do have the agreement on the bullish divergence off the previous daily low. We do have a lot of the bullish divergences off the lows going into Globex, and then we have all the bearish indications off the highs. So it's a wishy-washy market this morning. Let me just see if we can kind of go through everything and maybe get a clear picture. One thing that I do want to point out here before we kind of wrap it up is the fact that we had a retracement scheme here for this most local leg, and we've already broken through the 61. You can see we had some pretty good resistance in the market right back here on August 25th, lined up almost exactly with a 61.8 retracement. They did bounce off of it almost to the tick, retest it there and bounce, but then they broke through, came down to a lower resistance level, which actually is kind of the next logical level of resistance. that is now acting as support. But when you zoom out, and I think I have it here on the 4-hour, when you zoom out, you have the larger leg. So the minor leg is this one here, this bounce up that we just looked at. If you zoom out, the major leg is this whole thing right here, and we have not come down to the 38% retracement for the major leg. So there is potential that maybe we pull back, and if you look at previous price action here, the highs from what day was that? August 16th. The highs and the resistance in the market there is lining up with exactly a 38% retracement. So I do think that that and the 50%, if you look at the 50% here, previous resistance on August 18th there, pretty strong, tested it 2 times, and then got this very strong sell-off here at the end of the day on August 18th. Very strong correction in the market from that level. We've never really come back to test it cleanly there, and it happens to be 50% of the previous day. And then arguably the 61.8 is just a few points in front of that other resistance area right around 13, where we also got a pretty healthy pullback there in the market. So these 3 levels, if they do end up breaking through the previous daily low, in my opinion, are going to be the most relevant levels. Somewhere around 1375, somewhere around 48, and somewhere around 71 to 73 here. So let's go ahead and see if we can kind of wrap it up. Obviously, ultra high time frames all just look pretty strong. We get to the daily, and you know something, I'm looking at this, and the more I look at it, the more I don't like labeling that a bullish divergence, because it is sloping up on RVI ever so slightly, and price has sloped up ever so slightly here. So I'm going to actually get rid of that and retract what I just said earlier, just because of the fact that technically the RVI is just a tick or two higher, and so is price. So I don't think that there's a really pretty divergence setting up there. We right now on the daily, all we really have is that bearish signal off the all-time high, and then you can see the previous daily bar that closed, kind of an ambiguous looking bar, maybe arguably more bearish with that huge wick on the upside. So things on the daily, in my opinion, still kind of look bearish with not the strongest bullish indication just yet. On the 4-hour, we did have the agreement on the all-time high, the bearish signal up there, but we are getting bullish signals off the lows and bearish signals off the previous daily high. On the 60-minute, same thing, agreement off the all-time high, but then we have the bullish indications off the previous daily low. And this 60-minute might be that one time frame in between all the others that doesn't show that bearish signal off the top end, which, if you're familiar with our strategy here, is okay. So if every other time frame has it and the 60-minute doesn't, we can kind of ignore the fact that the 60 doesn't have it. But we do have, if that's the case, then we would have just one more point here for the bulls off the lows. When we go down to our 30-minute, let's just see if that helps anything with our story. Pretty much no, because we do have the bearish signal off the previous daily high and the bullish signal off the previous daily low and all the other lows that came down here, and same situation on the 10. So this is one of those mornings where really not getting much of anything as far as direction. I think that we do have some levels below us that make sense to be tested if we do come down, and we've kind of demarcated the 3 major ones below us. So this morning, essentially, we're just going to have to see what the market brings us. It'll be very conditional. If we can get through the previous daily high, we'll negate a lot of those bearish indications and potentially see a push up into the all-time high again, test up there. We do have some areas of contention on the way up. And then conversely, if we do see some type of sell-off this morning and we can get through the previous daily low, where we do have all the other bullish indications, then we're going to have to reconsider and expect a pullback to some of these deeper levels that we talked about, levels of contention for the bears. So I think that's where we'll leave it this morning. And just keep in mind, we're doing this every morning here So we can find those mornings when everything does align and we have the stars align and we get a real clear picture of what to do. We just don't have it this morning, and so it just is what it is.